had the pleasure of watching you, Ken, as you went through, is it 3 years of working on Frenemies, and the world changed right in front of you, sort of along the way. Could you just talk a little bit about what you saw? So the whole idea of Frenemies, obviously, is that in the advertising business, the ad agencies are both partners and competitors with so many of the other providers for corporations particularly. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I came into the world I wrote about in this book a bit naive. I'd covered media and communications for New Yorker, done 11 books, none about advertising. And yet I kept on thinking of that old Watergate adage, follow the money. And when I looked at things I had written about, like newspapers and magazines and radio and other communications, and saw how they were falling off a cliff, they were falling off a cliff in large part because advertising dollars were fleeing. And as I got into the world of advertising, the phrase frenemies was one that was popularized by Martin Sorrell. In fact, it was invented by Walter Winchell in 1948, who, looking at the Soviet Union and the competition, said that they're our frenemy. But advertising agencies have enormous number, as Anne has suggested. PR agencies are in the advertising business. Consulting companies are in the advertising business. Google and Facebook are disintermediating them. Clients increasingly are taking stuff in-house. You go to New York Times and you see over 300 people in sales, and yet a third of them are an ad agency creating ads and bypassing the agency. But I came to feel, just to sum up, that the biggest frenemy and the one that is most disruptive is the public. The consumer doesn't like being interrupted, and I saw the last panel, people talking about overstuffing those television ads in those minutes, one of the reasons for Netflix's popularity. But one of the questions I was left with at the end of 3 years of reporting in is, how do you reach people who don't want your pre-rolls, don't want your banner ads, don't want your 30-second spots, don't want to be interrupted, particularly on the dominant device of their lives, the cell phone, without it feeling like an intrusion? And I think that's a fundamental question I have. And which leads me to that question you. I mean, you oversee marketing and advertising for Bank of America. What's your answer to that? How do you overcome that aversion that the public has to advertising?
Well, I have heard a little bit of what's covered here today, so you've covered it pretty well. But from a client perspective, you have to think of everything. So it is true that live events are still very useful. And so we advertise on live events because you're not likely to fast forward through the 8th inning or the 4th quarter, or et cetera. So live events are always important. Recognizing also, though, that people are usually using a device at the same time, so we're trying to advertise there too, which is a little more complicated. In our case, and in most large clients' cases, we have, not only do we have internal, big investments in data and analytics, but also using some of the consultants that are companies that you listed up there earlier. And so we're better at targeting. We understand everything from addressable TV to how to hit the consumer directly. The problem with that is you may make a sale, but it's kind of transactional. So your data may be good. You may know that I can do the next product to buy analytics. You may be right about it, but you lose a little of the magic of any brand. I don't care what the brand is. If you don't have a platform to speak more globally about the value of the company, and that's hard. And that's, if with each day this becomes more difficult because people are getting rid of ads in any way possible. I really do think that's never going to change now. And live events will at some point figure out how not to have us in there either. And it's a constant challenge, which means that the brand needs to infiltrate in other ways.
Like?
Through employees being good ambassadors, through your public policy, through what the media says about you. In other words, you have to have a 360-degree look at that brand, and you have to be thinking about every interaction that's going to take place, every complaint, because it all adds up. Because word of mouth is viral now. Word of mouth, I can't tell you something and then you decide not to use the bank, or you decide to use the bank. You'll then go on Facebook and spew it to the world. So I have to be thinking about that all the time, and we do think about it all the time. And so does every other brand.
Do you also think a lot about the duopoly, the Google and Facebook and Amazon?
Yeah, we think about them.
And how do you think about them?
Well, I think about them differently. So Google still has a lock on search. And so from an advertiser's point of view, they're always going to get a lot of money because of search. They still have a lock on it. That could change, but right now they
but
have.
Yet I've seen figures that say that if you go on Amazon, 50% of the people who search for a product do it on Amazon, not on Google. That's a dagger in the heart of Google.
Yeah, but not for a brand like ours. So a bank, you're not going on Amazon for a bank. So it depends on your brand. If it's a product, it's a death knell, but it's not for other kinds of entities. So for us, Google's really important. Facebook is an interesting case in that Facebook is, and YouTube is really important as a destination. So Google, in terms of both for search and in terms of destination, YouTube are both important. Facebook's different. Facebook, it's more complicated with Facebook, and Facebook has had more problems. So their statistics on advertising are okay. I think that they've just faced more, at least for a brand like ours, there are more problems.
You have, I mean, one of the things that I thought a lot about as I'm reporting my book is the privacy issue. And I would go into clients or platforms, and I say, so what is the answer to the question, how do you make it feel like it's not an interruption, your ads? And they say, well, we'll have so much information about you, we'll be able to target ads for you, and it won't feel like an ad, it'll feel like a service. Mm-hmm. So I said, for instance, and they said, well, you know, we know you bought a sport jacket at Barney's 2 months ago, and we have your GPS, Ken, so we know you're only 2 blocks from Barney's. And if you go into Barney's now, we'll give you 20% off on a new sport jacket. So then the question becomes, will Ken, when he hears that, will he say, this is a great service for me, I love this discount, or will he say, this is really creepy? Mm-hmm. What is your answer to that?
It's only creepy if it's not something you wanted. I think that if you thought, I'd like 20% off of a sport coat, you think, I'm good with that.
But how do you know I wanted it?
Well, predictive modeling. We don't know that you want it, but we know that you shop there. We know that that's, so Barney's cares about that, so does a financial services company, because you're going to use some currency to buy it. Therefore, we're just as interested as Barney's is.
But do you worry that there's a line you can't cross, and what is that line?
Well, the line you can't cross, first of all, it depends on your industry. We have firewalls, so we can't share any data with a third party. Having said that, we like to see what the third party has, so we do like to see, Google and Facebook both have walled gardens too, so they sort of spoon feed us what they have, and that becomes unattractive after a while.
Because it's partial.
Of course it is.
Right.
And so we have just built up, we and most other big brands that can afford billions of dollars of investment in analytics have built our own analytics. And so we know, of course, we know if you did buy it. We know how often you buy it. We know if you're a customer, if you bought anything else somewhere else. So data and analytics is the name of the game, because everything, in terms of just how clients spend their money, so much more is spent on some form of addressable marketing, one-to-one, either some direct fashion, and it's very cost efficient, and it's quite effective. The problem is you're leaving the brand to be defined by the media and others, which is not a good thing. And the more time that goes by, the group before us was talking about, will there be advertising? And I agree there'll be no advertising on Netflix. first run, or maybe with Amazon, but they have to, I mean, just to monetize or amortize the cost of something, they're going to have to syndicate it the way the networks used to syndicate, and that's where we think we can advertise.
You know, one of the things that when I started my book 3 years ago, Martin Sorrell and others in the advertising world would talk about how we like the idea of Snapchat. We're pouring some money into Snapchat because we want to create competition for the digital giants like Google and Facebook. Well, Snapchat has passed its prime in that. And now they're saying, well, Amazon. But Amazon is growing exponentially. And
right.
Do you worry about Amazon? Or do you see it as a useful competitor to Facebook and Google?
Well, I see Amazon differently. Amazon is a marketplace of merchandise, so as a financial services firm, I like Amazon. I don't like it when they start competing with us, which they'll do.
By creating banks?
Well, some currency. So, I mean, that's inevitable.
So they're just a frenemy, in effect?
Could be. Not right now, but could be. Everything's a frenemy. Speaking of frenemies, the people that you highlighted, some of them are gone. I mean, they are giants in the industry, or they're certainly players in the industry. Martin,
Erwin
Gottlieb, even
Les Moonves.
But even, I mean, a brand like GE, which was indestructible, seems totally. I mean, what do you make of all that?
Change. It's me as a journalist. I have no responsibility for anything. So change is great material for my books. And someone said in one of the reviews of my books, they said, "But does this date Auletta's book that Martin Sorrell, for instance, is gone?" And in the book, in the last chapter of the book, I asked Martin Sorrell. I said, "You're going to turn 73 next year. Do you think about leaving?" And he said, "They'll have to shoot me to get me out of here." Well, 2 months later, after my book had gone to bread, they shot him, and he left. But him departing, or Erwin Gottlieb departing, or Les Moonves departing, doesn't change the fact that these are historic figures in the advertising world. 33 years, Martin Sorrell started and built the largest holding company, most successful holding company, and that's an imprint he's had. So I just see it as change, but it doesn't change the fact that he was a giant, important figure in the advertising world.
Yeah, but what about, so I forget what year your book, Three Blind Mice, How the Networks Lost Their Way.
91.
Okay. So what do you make, so that's GE is involved there. I mean, they enter stage right then, right?
In '86, the three networks were purchased by three giant companies, GE purchasing NBC.
Okay. And now GE sort of during your Frenemies book and after. I mean, what do you make of that arc?
It's life. I mean, that's what gives.
Well, that's not what any brand wants to hear. That's like.
No, but I'm not a brand. You are.
Yeah, no,
You've got to worry about it. I don't have to worry about anything. I've got no responsibility. I'm just following your world, and it's fascinating. And if GE goes from, I mean, I had great time following them as they came into NBC, and they tried to change the culture of NBC, and were actually shocked by the culture of NBC. In part, they were right. In part, they were wrong. They were right about the fact that they found out that NBC News was producing half of the programs they produced, or the pieces they did, not programs, the piece they did for news. The average cost was $50,000, and yet only half of them ever aired. And they said, this is crazy. And they were right about that. On the other hand, these were suits. These were people who didn't understand that news is a different business. Larry Tisch, who was then the head of CBS, when he went the first time to visit bureaus overseas, he goes to the Rome bureau of CBS, and he says to Howard Stringer, who was the acting vice president, #2 in news at the time, he said, Howard, these people are just sitting around. What are they doing? And Howard tried to explain to him, well, actually reporters wait for phone calls to be returned, wait for their planes to take off, wait for correspondence to be, that's what reporters do. We spend a lot of time waiting. And business people don't necessarily understand that. And so that culture clash was great fodder for me as a journalist.
Yeah, but from a brand perspective, what you're always trying to do is stay current and also anticipate the future. I mean, Bank of America obviously went through along with other banks, but we particularly went through a chaotic time with the financial crisis. I do feel like that perhaps kept us on our toes in present years more than maybe other categories. I'm saying the financial services industry. But if we're not ever vigilant, whether it's a payments area or even in data, you could lose ground.
But isn't this what Clayton Christensen wrote that book about, the Harvard professor,
Yeah.
The Innovator's Dilemma, that you have a legacy business, an existing business, and you want to protect it because it's generating most of your profits and your bonuses as a CEO. And on the other hand, you see digital or some other upstarts coming along, and how much do you take from legacy business and put it into the new business? How do you deal with the Innovator's Dilemma? How do you address that as vice chair of this giant company?
Well, I think the biggest change for us has been how much money we spend in technology. I mean, it's the one place where we will spend whatever it takes. And so that...
Even siphoning it from existing?
Yes. So, and particularly on cyber. So the difference in technology, because it's both a destination and a transportation system, I mean, so much of our business is done through a mobile app today. If we had not innovated to the degree we needed to, we would have been one of those brands that goes away. So, I mean, you just stay current. But I'm mindful of the time, and we said we would take questions. Did you have anything that you wanted to cover?
No.
Okay. So are there any questions that are here in the...
Well, while we wait for a question, let me ask you one. When you look at GE, which you raised,
Right.
what was their mistake? What they failed to do?
I don't know what they failed to do. I mean, the thing is that I always thought GE, and I still think GE is a great company, but I think they were leading with what they were not doubling down on. So they were talking about the environment when I think they were really doing other kinds of business in energy. And I think if you're saying one thing and doing another, it can be confusing in the marketplace because you don't know where you're going to put your money. I mean, that's a simplistic version of things, but I do think that.